This video is for how to VST an outline and write into the sentence frames for to what extent. The verb for to what extent is to what extent. What you're ultimately asking yourself is how much do you agree with the argument? There will either be an argument given directly to you or it will be implied in the question, and you decide, do I agree to a great extent or a small extent? There is no middle ground. You can't say to some extent, otherwise we're not making a bold claim and a bold argument. How you're going to outline it is you want to think of it like a scale and you're like weighing it back and forth. And so we're just going to set up a T-chart, and one side is going to be small extent, the other side's great extent. You brain dump it down, and then you kind of see what your answer is going to be. So our prompt is going to be, to what extent is social media a positive influence for high school students? So my lovely assistant here is going to VST. Our V will be what?
To what extent?
To what extent? Our S, what's our skill?
How much you agree with the argument?
Yes, how much we agree. I usually just write how much agree, just to abbreviate it, because that's what I'm ultimately asking. And then the T is our keywords from the prompt. What are our keywords?
Social media.
Social media.
Positive influence.
Positive influence. That's the argument that we're saying, is that the social media is a positive influence. And positive influence for who?
High school students.
High school students specifically. So this is going to be important to write this down. We have the argument here that social media is positive, and we're either going to agree to a great extent or a small extent. So let's go ahead and set up a T-chart so we can outline. Okay, let's put small extent on the left, or actually great extent on the left and small extent on the right to match what I already have in the notebook, or it doesn't even really matter as long as you label it correctly. And so what we need to start doing is just thinking, what are some different reasons for both of them? So what would be a reason to agree with this statement to a great extent that, yeah, social media is a positive influence for students?
Well, it helps them to communicate easier.
Communication, I would definitely say that that's a good one, and we could come up with many different evidences, but for the purposes of this activity, we won't be needing to do that. What other ideas are you thinking? Great extent or small extent, do you have an idea for?
Small extent, because sometimes it can be too much pressure for the student to handle.
Okay, so too much pressure. Because it highlights insecurities, because you see what everybody else is doing and achieving. All right, so now we're at that even point, but we have to have 3 reasons, so we need one to tip the scales. What's another reason that it's either positive or negative?
It helps with school activities. Does that count as communication?
I would say that school activities goes under communication, and so that would be quite related.
Or we can say, on a small extent, like it is a distraction.
Oh yeah, I definitely think that's a good one. So back to small extent, it's a distraction. So even if you agree overall that, yeah, social media is actually a positive influence, what matters is that you're able to write about it and articulate it. And I think with the argument we have set up here, we'd be able to come up with multiple evidences to branch off for each of these. So what we've decided is we're to a small extent. And so now we just need to decide which sentence frame we use, to a great extent or to a small extent. We use to a small extent. So now let's go ahead and write it out. Even though, and then we always give the reason that we have less support for. That's the one we start with. So we're going to start with the agree since we have more disagree. And so it's going to be, even though social media is a great communication tool, and comma, and we're going to plug in the T from VST. And since we already said social media, we can just say it. It is a positive influence and we're taking this directly from our T, is positive influence for high school students. And then this is where we get in this argument, to a small extent. Because, and then we just list off the two reasons, our two main ideas. Because it fuels insecurities. And is a distraction. And then this is where we get the bold claim in. And we might have to play with this a little bit to make it work. I think in this case we want to change it to playing a far more significant role in. And then we have to ask ourselves, what do our two ideas really have to do with? What is the overall answer to our question of why social media is maybe not a positive influence? It's a positive influence to a small extent. I'm looking at them, and if it's causing insecurities and it's a distraction, if it ends up being a distraction that ends up causing more stress in the long term, I would say overall, the main idea between these two things is that it's detrimental to mental health for students. And then you ask yourself, is insecurities bad for mental health? Yep. Are having distractions from what we need to get done bad for our mental health? Yeah, and I think we could argue that. So, which playing a far more significant role in teen mental health. Being negatively impacted. Good shorthand. All right, so this is to what extent. Asking yourself, how much do you agree with something to a great extent or small extent? Break it down into a T-chart like a scale, and then we weigh it, and then that's where we go from there. Always making sure to start with the one we have less of. So, to what extent do you like to what extent?